Thanks, John, and great job, Brian, capturing a lot of history. Fiona kept asking me, okay, what's going to be my theme? What's going to be my message? And I said, I don't know. I'll figure it out when I get up here. It's how we do it in Indian country. So I do, for all of you who participated last night, we definitely thank you, because one of the things that comes to mind for me on 40 years of the PST environment and family is we in the indigenous communities in the U.S. and in Canada came in and said, we are part of the solution. And that's what really the message was last night, bringing our indigenous knowledge into the mix of the technology and the techniques that Brian is referencing, how we have grown. I find it amusing when I was listening to him about when the technology and computers got involved in our environment. Because back in the day when all of a sudden IBM and Compaq, etc., started emerging in quote unquote laptops, I was one of the guys in Indian country who gravitated to it really fast. And if you remember, the original laptops weren't exactly laptops. They were like little suitcases. And they flipped open and they had these little tiny screens. Either they were amber or they're green, and you had to figure out, exactly, how you were going to be able to use them, and much less bringing them onto an airplane. They didn't fit. They were so damn big. But it helped us do our job, and it certainly did change the way we're doing business in terms of managing fisheries and technology and data collection, etc. So I'm here primarily in my mind carrying the spirit of Lorraine Loomis, Billy Frank, and those from our area down south. And you heard a lot of the First Nation elders and leaders up here in Canada in terms of the spirit that they brought to the importance of salmon. And for me, Brian did a good job of capturing the history before we got here. Lorraine, for example, back in the ISPC days, where she and Mike Graham, who worked for the Northwest Fish Commission, used to have to kind of pound on the door to find out what the hell's going on in there with regard to sockeye that we cared about in the South. And so when we finally got to an agreement back in 1985, we found ourselves at the table. And yes, the boat decision made a difference. For us in the South, we had treaties, and we made sure that our treaties were inside of this treaty. And for us, it was a huge issue in terms of having a seat at the table, having a voice about what the solutions are, and how to find that balance. As a tribal leader, I didn't come with technical knowledge. We had our people who are our experts. Brian referenced them, Gary Morishima and the Mike Grahams, etc., that we had them. And the First Nations had theirs. Mike Staley, I remember Mike Staley being right there for the First Nations with regard to the Fraser River sockeye and pink runs, and in terms of how we would have a voice. I guess one of the things from my observation, having been here since the beginning, the character of our family has changed. And I remember how tense it was back in the day, trying to find a way to get to common ground, trying to find a way to find an agreement that was going to protect a species that we all cared about. It was a part of our hearts, part of our spirits, part of our way of life. Salmon. Every one of the species. That was the common thread that we all had. And we had to figure out how we were going to save it, how we were going to stop, quote unquote, the fish wars. And even when we got into the agreement, remember, we got into the 90s, and all of a sudden the fisheries was falling apart on us for different reasons, and we find ourselves clashing again. Canada having, putting barricades and stopping ferries and trying to get the attention of the decision makers with regard to we're screwing up. This is not working, and so we had to find a way and bob and weave our way through the politics of the day. So it was an interesting process. I brought up a little note to myself. Because as we reflect on the leadership of PST, it's so many personalities, so many leaders of different levels of expertise. On our side, we had Don Collingsworth, Dave Coulson was the State Department, Tim Wapato, Guy McMines was among our tribal leaders, Bill Wilkerson, Doc Donaldson from the States and in the South, Joe Blum, Guy McMines, or I already said him, but Dave Benton, Dave Bedford, Alaska leadership, Jeff Shelton. Oh my word, try to get on a subject matter that Jeff Shelton didn't know. Anybody remember that? And Jim Pipkin, Larry Rudder, which without a doubt I really do appreciate Brian bringing Larry Rudder's name up. Canada, we had a long list, Garnet Jones and Cliff Atleo, Patty Green, Jerry Christensen, who's here someplace. Raise your hand, Jerry, where are you? There he is. Oh, my word. So we bring Jerry from the International Forum into our forum, try to help us get our act together. Bob Wright was another one, Pat Chinners, Yves Fortier, Paul Sprout. We love Paul Sprout. Gibby Jacobs, and Russ and Murray here, and that's with us, Paul McGilvery. Just a lot, I'm sure, and there's so many more, I'm not even naming, just in the commission forum, much less the panel forums, that all did their job in terms of trying to protect and find a way to do a better job of managing the Chinook and the coho and the chum, the sockeye, the pink, every one of our species that was so important to it. And we found ways to make that work. And the PST Secretariat Office, I saw Ian here, and Don Cole, I don't know if Don is here, but now we got John Field, and the staff has changed. Over the years, we've lost a lot of our expertise, with regard to Fraser talent, but yet they were able to recruit the kind of talent that we need to collaborate between our talent in the U.S. and Canadian talent and DFNO, etc. So it just, when I think about it, we found ways to bob and weave a way through difference of opinion on how we're going to manage fisheries. How are we going to find ways to find the models and the techniques that we need to improve our ability? It's always about resources. Do we have enough resources? How do we pound on the doors in Ottawa, on the doors of Washington, D.C. to get the resources out here so that we can do our job? It's complicated. And one thing that I've learned, over the years of being a part of this process is how complicated it is. Every one of the stocks of each species just has its own story. And we always think of it as, for Indian country and tribes, every river has a people. And we live on those rivers. We live around those rivers, and we know those rivers. We feel the life of the rivers and what's so important. Brian touched on a lot of issues, and yes, over the years, things have changed, climate has changed, growth has changed, people development has changed, agricultural practices have changed, timber practices have changed, and all having different impacts, and we have to find a way to balance it. I keep reminding our colleagues in this forum, our job is harvest management. But we have to have that watchful eye on what's going on upriver, downriver, what's going on with the ocean, what's happening with regard to how we're managing our fishery. What's the right balance? How do we find ways to which that there can be a fisheries? Every one of us have a history. Indian country, the tribes, indigenous people will say we have a longer history than you. But the Norwegians, the Swedes, and all those, we got a pretty deep history too. So we got that. Why are we wasting our energy fighting over who has a longer history? We should be making focus on how are we going to improve our ability to be better stewards of the resource and the habitat that is so important to each and every one of us. So my message is that I think that over the years, thinking about Brian's comments, we have come together. Yeah, we have difference of opinion. We have different styles and different approaches in terms of how we're going to, what's the best technology, what's the best model, are we putting the right data in it, but we're getting better. And each one of these regimes that we go through, we keep getting better. And then as we get into the regime, well, it didn't work out exactly like we thought. Well, then that's our job. Figure out what we do to fix it, tweak it, adjust it, so that there's a balance. Back in the day, I remember the big arguments about the big E and the little e on equity. Okay, I kept going, what the hell's the difference between the big E and little e, So, or pasturing. Okay, we have a greater value because of pasturing. We're growing them up. And then Tim Wapato will go, well, wait a minute, gravel to gravel. If they didn't start in our backyard, you didn't get anything to pasture. So you get into the ridiculous arguments about who has a right to it. And we all have a right to it. We all have a right to it, and that's what we're doing now is we're coming to grips with that. How do we find that balance? Whether it's interceptory fishery, whether it's fisheries going across to transboundary fisheries, etc. So to me, they're critically important. I want to get us on time here, and I just want to go over a couple quick things that help provide you a little humor in what we do. Larry Rudder, we got a lot of, we all have Larry Rudder stories. We're quite proud of him from my tribe because he used to work for us before he moved on to intertribe and then also to the federal government and became one of our commissioners. But when we get into our conversation, we say things that we kind of go, okay, I got to write that down. And he called it fish speak. So, Brian talked about Don Blevin. Fishery management is too important to be entrusted to the commissioners. Don Collingsworth. It's time for us to pass on the ceremonial responsibility in this can of worms to the next set of commissioners. Bernie Bond. We need to kick this process into gerbil drive. Denny Austin, who was a part of the Southern panel. The problem has been too much history to be rational. Okay, what the hell does that mean? Dave Colson. Scientists can be bought. Like lawyers. They're just cheaper. Bernie, I got another one for Bernie. Hurry up, or they'll change the proposal before we've seen it. Let me find some more. Joe Dela Cruz. This is the tribal indigenous one. Problem is, we're running out of Indians to deal with all these problems. Lorraine Loomis. I don't want to do any of the actual work because I'm not good at it, but I can give orders. Larry Rudder. We need to make another political model run. A political model run. What does a political model run look like anyhow? What data do we put in a political model run? So Larry would go, if it's arbitrary, it must be policy. Paul Sprout, we need to find a way to reduce the ocular impact. Okay. Okay, Paul, wait a minute now. Tim Wapato. He's talking to Bill Wilkerson on our side. Bill goes, what do I need to know? Wapato goes, nothing. You're a commissioner. Jim Woody, one of our old Fraser guy. There's principles, and then there's biology. And I'm going to finish one of mine. Believe it or not, I think we found a way to slow this process down. Thank you.